my heart's about reconciliation. Our church is driven about reconciliation because that's what God says we're supposed to be about. And my hope one day and the dream is that Aboriginal people will teach this country what true reconciliation is. Because the country has no idea about reconciliation.
There's a lot of talk about it, but
so the government's got a policy on it, but they've got no idea.
Right.
So the point is that God taught us what it is. It's through His Son, no other way. So we're about that, and we strive to live it.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Shock Absorber podcast. It's very good to have you along with us, and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Stu Crawshaw. How are you?
Hello Joel.
Excellent. And it's always exciting to have you on, Stu, but I'm quite excited to have a special guest on today by the name of Michael Duckett. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
It's great to have you along.
It's a joy to be here.
Yeah, so the cool thing that we've been talking about lately is how we're ministering the 2010s, 2020s. And many of the things that we've talked about have raised some issues that we probably perhaps have spoken about before that we may not have the most authority to speak about. But a lot of the issues that have been raised, Michael, I think is something that you're very passionate about and very can speak very helpfully about it. But I thought before we get into those kind of things, it'd be awesome to hear about your ministry and what you usually do day to day. Can you let us know about that?
Yeah, so I'm a pastor of Aboriginal Church.
Yep.
We've got about, 20,000 people in our church. No, just joking. It's probably about 15 to 20 on a good day, you know.
Yeah.
And we're a dysfunctional church. People with all different issues come together and we just love each other. We're a dysfunctional family. Some have blood ties, some don't, but we love each other as we're family, and that's what makes us special.
Where are you guys situated?
So our church site is about 12 k's out of Campbelltown, at a little place called Wedderburn, so it's in the bush.
So southwest Sydney, right?
Yeah. So we're at 5 acres of beautiful scrub.
Really?
Full of gum trees and squiggly gums, and it's just a glorious, I call it God's church because He made it.
Yeah.
It was His gums.
Yep.
He made all the native scrub, and we get to enjoy it and meet in there. And it's funny enough that when you're in country, in the bush, God speaks to people's hearts through His creation of just about reminding them of His power and might. And I can't do that. I can try to lead people through the Word, and He speaks through His Word, but He does also still speaks through creation to remind people of His might, and my people relate to that.
Yeah, right.
They value that and reconnect. Yeah.
You spoke about it being dysfunctional. What does that look like? Why do you say that?
I say that because our community is so broken with so much a history of a past poor treatment. So a lot of our families struggle to know what family is.
Right.
A lot of our people been through, children's homes, stolen generation. So our community is just struggling to understand what family is because it's been taken away. So when I say dysfunction, it's just we're just trying to find our feet again as a people to know what it is to be loved. It's not what it is to be raised up. It's not a common thing in it, because we've got a hard families,
Yeah.
and they're just making do. Resilient. So when I say dysfunction, it's just we didn't grow up with a lot of them with what people have today, So we're trying to find our way again.
And how do you find that people respond to Jesus in your?
Oh, look, some people are very angry at God because a lot of homes were driven by Christian organisations back in the day, so they didn't think of God as a very mean God, There was no love in the homes. I can tell you that many people have been abused in those homes under God's name, and it's horrific.
Right.
So when you hear the word God, they just go red. They're angry because what's been done to them in the past in the name of God. So I just have to keep reminding my people that God doesn't do those things, as people do those things. They might have done it under the banner of some religious group, but never blame God for those things. That's people, wicked people doing wicked things. And so that's a hard thing to get on board with because all they remember is being forced to get on their knees and pray, being forced. They can't eat till they pray. They can't do anything before they acknowledge God in formality. So when you start talking about a God who loves them, it's foreign.
That would be difficult to
So
understand.
we just got to be God's hands in how we love people.
Yeah.
And it does. It happens. I've seen God change people's lives. I've seen God soften people's hearts because they realise they have an encounter with a living God, as opposed to what's been shoved down their throat historically. You know, since colonisation, where all over people are forced to put shoes on and wear clothes and bow to God. You know.
Yep. And, you've had an encounter with God. You've become a Christian. Can you tell us about how you did become a Christian?
Yeah, I was a young fella, probably, I don't know, 17, 18, something like that. And I went to UCRIP sometimes, down at Thurul.
Oh, yeah.
And
That's the south
Baptist
coast.
church.
That's the south coast of
Yeah.
New South Wales, yep.
Bottom Below Pass.
Yep.
And I had a youth worker there. He's a real dorky fella, old bloke. And we stole the car and trashed his house and that.
Oh, right.
We were young fellas. But he kept coming back. I didn't understand that. But what I learnt was he loved us. He put up with us, being real disrespectful. I still know that fella today. So he demonstrated to me the love of God, but I didn't realise it. And then I had a fella preaching. My mum took me to a church in Wollongong, a big cinema, and she offered to buy me dinner, so I went along, you know, for a feed. And this preacher was preaching in this big cinema, and he said that Jesus was spat upon and beaten. And it didn't make sense to me. The Son of God gets spat upon and beaten, because I thought the Son of God was big muscles, you know, big fella.
Yep.
He'd bust anybody, you know, by looking at him. And so it didn't make sense to me. But when I heard that the Son of God loved me that much, he was spat upon. And when I was in high school, I got spat upon from a fella up on balcony. I don't know who it was, but it ran down my shirt, and I was that angry and humiliated. I would have killed somebody. And then when I heard that God did that for me, you know, he got spat on, I said, that's it. He's got my life. And I never looked back since. I said, if God can do that for me, I knew what it was like to be humiliated, and I thought, well, I'll serve him for the rest of my life. And I've never turned back since, because I had that little bit of a understanding of the humiliation that he went through for me. I thought, if the Son of God can do that for me, mate, I'm in.
Yeah. What changed for you after that?
I stopped swearing around as much and carried on silly, and I didn't drink much after that. 'Cause I thought it wasn't good, you know. Trying to be a Christian, you know, with all the non-Christian followers and that. And so it took me a while. I'm still trying to get my feet on it, trying to live a godly life, you know.
Yeah.
And but it changed my mentality to everything. My attitude to women, you know, changed. I learned to be more respectful of women and that. But before I had very little respect. I respect my mum because she'd hit me. But everybody else, I just was a wild little man, you know, a little angry little fella. And was going through foster care as a little fella, that has an impact on the life. You know? So you've got to work through all that identity and all this sort of stuff. So it's deep-seated stuff.
Yeah.
And when God steps in, he starts cleaning out the cupboard, you know?
Yeah.
And starts healing and filling in the gaps in your life and your holes. So it's great.
Yeah.
Whilst he hones you and disciplines you. So it's cool.
It's true. We're all like God's always shaping us and molding us all the time, right? I was also wondering, how did you and Stu get connected? Or Stu, do you want to share when?
Well, you go first, mate. Could you remember that?
Yeah. Well, I think the first time I met you, Michael, was at a regional conference. We're both
right.
Anglican ministers in the Anglican Church, and Michael came along to the same conference I was a part of because we're both in the same region of our Anglican denomination in Sydney. It's called the Wollongong region, and we were both part of that. And I think the first time we ever sat down was at a conference, and we sat down at the table and just had a yarn and a cup of coffee and got to know each other, or a cup of tea, and just got to know each other that way. And over the years, we've done a few things together, and over the last few years, we've seemed to be getting together a bit more often and doing a few more things. So, so both being ministers of churches, like we've got some good stuff to talk about. We talk about how we're looking after people, and we're also doing some things together. Like last year, we did some fun stuff together out out your way. Some of the crew from our church went out, and we all had a really lovely couple of days of fellowship, and we did some work together on the barn out there on the shed, and that was fun to do together. And so we've done a bit together. Hey,
and one of the benefits of they brought about 40 people out to our place to help renovate an old barn, I suppose you could call it. It was all about falling over, real bad. It was not very safe.
Yep.
But the thing, it looks beautiful now. But the point that really mattered was some of my mob was sitting there, and they couldn't understand why 40 non-Aboriginal people come all the way to us to serve us and work with us. And my old uncle said to me, I've never in my life thought I'd see a white man serving a black man.
Right.
So, it might have been a few days or two work with them, but that had an impact on my people they'll never forget. They've never seen that before in their life. Yeah. And that's what I call ministry, I guess. We don't care what people say, because words are cheap sometimes, but we look at people's actions as Aboriginal people. We look at how they walk, how they talk, how they treat you. And them coming out our way to help us fix this barn, we didn't have the means or the skills to do that. And they blessed us, and my people going, wow, I've never seen that in my life. So that changes the whole worldview of a person.
Yeah.
And why? Because God intervened and brought us together for his glory and for the furtherance of his kingdom. So that's pretty cool. It's pretty good.
Yeah, and it was a fun day too, because Michael had this vision. Instead of just putting up posts, we cut some trees down and used them as posts. So that was heaps of fun. That was my favourite bit. So here we were digging these big holes and getting these big gum trees, weren't we? These big trunks. And there was one of my favourite parts of the day was, and I think Dave, our producer, was there too. I think there was 15 of us all under it with our shoulder underneath this big log together, wasn't it? And we had this really, really long log, and we're all, picked it up together, and we were all walking together, and then we all put it in the ground together, and we hoisted it up in the air, and it was something we did actually literally together. Like everyone needed to put their hand on that log together, and we're all put it in the ground, and then we put the fast set concrete together, and we're all doing that, and then we all stood back together and looked at it and went, "Wow, that was big effort to put that in the hole." So that was my favourite part of the day. Actually, it was really cool.
I thought they were crazy, but anyway, I was thinking I'll just tie a rope around and drag it with a ute. But no, they said, "No, we'll carry it." I said, "Go for it, mate."
It was fun, wasn't it?
Well, they picked it up, and I'm sitting there going, "Wow, never seen that in my life."
Yeah, right. What do you use the shed for now?
Oh, we sit under there when we have big mobs coming together.
Yeah, nice.
So it's just a big open space. So the idea is that if we have, depending on the weather, we need more space. We have more than 20 people. We can go sit under there and be all covered. Yeah. I'll be doing painting under there with my old aunties, so make it available we do workshops of painting, teaching our next generation how to paint, craft, boomerang making. I teach young boys how to make boomerangs and that. So you sit down under the tomahawk and just start hacking away, and you're in the bush, you're feeling the dirt under your feet, and all you see is gum trees around you, and it's just earthy. And it brings back, for the old people, many are born under those sheds. So when they come there and see those sheds, it just warms their heart. They go, "Oh, you know what, boy, I was born under one of these." And it's all rustic and rusty, and they just, and I was going to put some bit of, asphalt or something on the ground to make it more sturdy. It's all dirt and sand. And my auntie said, "Don't be stupid, boy. I want to feel it in my toes when I sit there." All right, no worries, Aunt, I'll leave it. Well, I was thinking of putting a nice pretty, bit of gravel or something so it's nice and firm when it's all rainy, it's all muddy. No, I'll leave it the way it is. So I always have to be, listen to my old people. So now it's still sandy and dirty, and you can feel the dirt in your toes.
You mentioned painting before, and you were just telling us before we started recording that you like to actually process a lot of your sermons and thinking of the Bible around painting. Yes. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so when I became a Christian, I never painted, never bothered painting. I never played a guitar. But when I became a Christian, I picked up the guitar and I've been playing ever since.
Okay.
And the Lord gave me a gift to play it, And I started painting and that was my first painting behind me.
Yeah, do you want to describe this painting that you've brought in for us?
When I was a young Christian, I was trying to understand how does God expect us to get along? Black and white, because it's always the dominance of culture over our people. And I was trying to understand how God wants us to work that out. And and God keeps things simple. That's what I like about it. You know, God, it's not rocket science, and He tells us time and time again through the blood of His Son will be reconciled one to another. You know, so I just painted that black and white can be united through the blood of Jesus. Without it, we'll never be reconciled truly. So for me, it was a no-brainer. But I wanted to paint it, and for me to see, but also when my people come around, they can see that too. That it's through that blood, and blood has a lot of significance to Aboriginal people. So we get that. We love the Old Testament. We love the storylines of all the old people. We love the storylines of Jesus because it resonates with us. It's part of our heritage. So we love the Old Testament, and when we see the blood of Jesus, we relate to that. We understand that it's crucial. You can't just hold hands and sing songs together. It's got to be the blood of Jesus that cleanses us, so then we can be united as one. So it's not, and that's all it is. We are visual people, so we paint in our caves, we mark the trees, mark rocks, for our people to understand the signposts and understand parts of our culture. So God's about culture, and He just wants to convey His message through our culture, as the Western Church does through their, stuff they do on their buildings,
podcasts and stuff.
Yeah, everything. It's just different means to convey the message and the love of God.
Yeah,
and we just do it with art, And
this painting that we've hung up behind you, that's the first painting you ever did?
Yeah, as a young Christian.
Not a bad job, man.
That was my effort to try and understand, the world. And I always remind myself about that.
Yeah.
It's not complex.
Do you mind if I describe it for people that are just listening?
Yeah, go
so
for
you've got a black hand and a white hand.
Yep.
And then above that is the cross, and there's blood coming down from the cross, almost coming across those two hands. And is that to signify that, like, the only way that we can see is that in terms of a reconciliation act of Jesus? Yeah, right.
So my heart's about reconciliation. Our church is driven about reconciliation, because that's what God says we're supposed to be about. And my hope one day and the dream is that Aboriginal people will teach this country what true reconciliation is. Because the country has no idea about reconciliation.
There's a lot of talk about it, but
so the government's got a policy on it, but they've got no idea.
Right.
So the point is that God taught us what it is. It's through His Son, no other way. So we're about that, and we strive to live it. That's the difference. Aboriginal people are 3% of the population of this country, and we continue to experience a lot of poor things from this country and the way we get treated. But the Christian people in our community are still trying to bring reconciliation to this country, through acceptance, forgiveness, loving and embracing. It's hard to expect, but God expects it. So we do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the same thing that our friend Ike or Isaac, who is out in Bawarana, he said the same thing, right, Stu?
Yeah, I think what's really cool about your painting, Michael, is the black and white hand prints on the painting. And we were talking last week about Isaac has a similar thing with a black and white handshake, that the two come together. And he says the same thing as yourself, that it's through the blood of Jesus that we can be forgiven and we can be reconciled to God and reconciled to each other. And he says the same sort of thing that you're saying there, in that we need to express that reconciliation better. And I think what's great about having you on today is to understand, I think, the wrong that has been done and is being done more, so that we can understand that, and as a country, and then also work out how do we go forward together. I think that's a really cool thing. Before the podcast, Michael, you were saying it's really important that as black and white Australians, as Australians from all different countries, that we walk together side by side as we go forward. I think that is brought out in your painting as well, that the black and white hand on your painting is side by side, and Jesus on the cross is above us, and He's our authority, but He serves us as authority, and He loves us, and He cares for us rather than dominates and controls and all those. He sort of changes power, doesn't he? He uses power to help and to serve and to love and to care, which is really lovely. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to reflect for us a bit more about some of the pain from the past? Would you share some of those some of that? Maybe, I mean, it's been 200 years of it's hard to summarise 200 years of history.
Yes.
But what do you think is important for us to listen to today on that?
Well, you can view many places about the history of Aboriginal people and that, and we've got the since colonisation, you've got the stolen land, then you've got the stolen children, then you get the stolen wages. That's affected a lot of our workers back in the day. They've got no money. Then you got the stolen water from our rivers, because they take the water and we've got no water left in our rivers, and that wrecks the whole system, the environmental system. So it's crazy that if there's anything worth stealing, it'll get taken from Aboriginal people and from the land. And when I talk about Aboriginal people, I'm talking about the land as well, so that everything just gets stripped because there's money in it. And the motivation behind Aboriginal people being moved around was always about money. When they lived on certain land and it was really valuable, they'd move the Aboriginal people to a different land, and then they'd move them again. Whenever they want land, they just move our people. And you go to Lower Perouse and you can see them sitting over there, looking over the bay there. It's like a little mission there, beautiful little place. But that was the second place. They were further over here before originally, and they wanted us, they moved them over to there. And now they're sitting on some of the richest place, and the dogs love it there. No, it's just a beautiful place. But the reality is that I'm sure they would have loved to move them again, but they left them there, and now it's there. But the point is that whenever there's something worthwhile, Aboriginal people always moved on. And today you'll see sacred sites being ripped up still today, and the mines, I get proof, go in there and rape it. Why? Because there's money in there. Yep. Oh, we're sensitive to Aboriginal people, we're sensitive to your culture, but there's actually money there, so we'll just move you along, or we'll just approve the mining, but we'll give you some money too, and try and buy them off, if that makes sense. They don't have any respect for our sites, our places, and it's just sad. So 200 years, 1816 was the first massacre out my way in Appin. First recorded legal murdering of Aboriginal people, it was authorised by the governor. Now it's over 200 years, and the heads that were cut off that day in 1816, they're still in a box today. So they've been repatriated back to this country, where they're in Sydney, but they still haven't been laid to rest. So for me, that doesn't show much progress, because that was your grandparents' skulls sitting in a box. You'd be livid. My people are expected just to accept that all these remains, they're right, they're in a box, they're okay. But there's no respect in that. We have a high regard in laying to rest the bones of the old people to show respect. So that's just a snapshot of progress. 20 years later, and those bones, those skulls are still sitting in a box today. So for me, that's not a lot of progress until they get laid to rest out of respect, I know it's only a minor thing, but it goes back from 1816. The skulls of men and women cut off, taken over England to be assessed and measured to see why our skulls are different, our eye sockets are deeper. They want to understand all that sort of stuff. You think we'd have grown up after 200 years and thought, let's just give it back and lay it to rest. So that's just a snapshot of, if we lose progress, there's a lot more Aboriginal programs. Our kids have the best opportunities at universities now. So that is progress. There's none of that when I was a little fella, and back in the day, no one's older than me, had nothing. Now we've got Aboriginal pathways and programs and assistance in schools to get our kids through school. It's great. But we've still got a long way to go.
What does you're talking a lot about progress there. What would progress look like for you, do you think? Because you mentioned the program stuff, but I feel like there's still some things that you think that could be changing for the better.
For me, the progress is in the mind. So you can have programs and policies and procedures, and I've seen many of them. I've been part of many of them, and they do all these beautiful policies and that. But unless it's lived by people and owned by people, it's just a bit of paper and a policy. And I've seen organisations, Anglican's got a great rap, other organisations got raps. I like a wrap too, like chicken and all in there, and salad and that. But a wrap is a great initiative, I guess. But if it's not owned by the people, it's not lived, well then to me it's useless. So what I'm saying is, it's not about the policies, procedures, it's not about the goals that people have, it's about owning up to and just living it. Acknowledging it, acknowledging the past. We don't want people to be saying sorry to us all the time. We don't want people to be trying to lift us out of the mud and think, oh, we'll save you. We don't want that. What we do like is just people to have a respect and willingness to walk with you. We don't want people dragging us. We don't want people pushing us. Just say, yeah, we'll walk with you, bro. That shows unity and respect. And we'll walk at your pace. We'll walk how you want to walk. If you want to drag the train and just dawdle, we'll walk with you and dawdle. If you want to run fast, we'll run fast. The key to ministry is to connect with a person and be a part of their story and their storylines, their journey. That's what I believe ministry is. You don't come in with your game plan and say, oh, well, you need to catch up, bro. We're up to stage 6 and you're still in stage 2. Come on, catch up. No. You walk at their stage, at their level, and just keep walking with them as God ordains. That's the key. In God's timing, in His way, led by Him, led by His Spirit. And sometimes you get frustrated walking with people. I just want to drag this far along. No, just walk. It's His journey. It's His pace. And that's where the Western world differs to our culture. We'll never dominate or force somebody because it just never works. They'll run off. They'll back off. Where if you walk in there at their pace, love them, and sometimes you've got to come back several times to love them, you know?
Yeah.
That's all right. God gives us the grace to do it. But it's a personal connection. It's a heart change. And that's what progress is, a heart change. Black Lives Matter, very public. I've seen a lot of different things about it. But it all comes back to the heart. It comes back to the mind. It comes back to how you talk about black lives in your families. Talk about how you tell your children about black people. How do you treat them? What do you think about them? It's having those general conversations in your own backyard, in your own home. That's what changes things. It's not about putting a post up or putting a podcast up. It's about... Or
a social media post or something.
It's just about how you, in your heart, treat black people, how you how you talk about black people in your home and to your children, and do you cross the road when you see a black fella drunk on the road? No, don't go nowhere and walk around him. You know, my boy runs up to him. When there's an old lady drunk on the street, he'll go up and, you right, you right? He'll get down on his hands and knees and look under there, you right? He's only 5. And I'm humbled. And my son even cares about this stranger he doesn't even know. It's brought in the park, drunk, as a skunk. And he walks up and taps on the head. And I'm thinking, what are you doing, boy? And she looks up and says, oh, hello, baby. All he knows that she's all right. And I was very humbled to see my little boy even care about someone else he doesn't even know, laying in the middle of the park in the public area, worried, you know? I said, that's good. Most of us will walk away from them. We go, nah, these black fellas are rowdy, they're yelling and swearing. I'm crossing the street. And some of them are, don't get me wrong. But it's the best sights I've been is sitting with the drunks saying, I love you. I don't preach to them, I don't go tell them anything. I sit there and go, look, I just want to sit with you. And when my son was born, I took him down to the drunks and introduced him to all the drunks in the park.
Right.
Hey, what are you doing, boy? I said, I want my son to meet you. You fellas are precious to me, and you're as worthy as any other person to meet my son. Here's my son, Machu. Hey, boy. And I just want to show them that they're worthy to meet my son as anybody else as an introduction, you know?
Yeah.
And I said, you see my son drinking in the park, you flog him and send him home. but the point is this, society says a lot of different things about Aboriginal people, and especially the smelly ones and the ones that they don't want to be near. Well, God says to me, they're the ones I should be with. The ones that I should be saying, we love you, and we feed them as much as we can. Yes, that's what we want to do. Because society, even our organisations, hardly touch them. Because they're hard. They're hard to work with, they're unreliable, they're irritating sometimes, they're swearing or they're noisy. They'll love you and stab you in one heartbeat. You don't know what you're going to get half the time.
Right.
But God just says, I love them too. So yes, it's a heart thing. It's a practical expression of love, and that's what we try to do as a church. You know, people have a need, We don't have much, but we'll do what we can for them, you know.
Stewie, Michael's touched on a lot of different topics there, which has been a pleasure to just sit and listen to you, man. So thank you. I'm just wondering what your reaction and thoughts are to what Michael's talking about.
I think, Michael, it's really cool that you brought up again today that you've shared with me in the past about recognising the past. And Michael and I are on a committee with the Anglican Church that explores reconciliation, don't we, brother? Yeah. And we're kind of thinking through together, what does it look like for the Sydney Anglican Church to express that reconciliation that Christ has won for us? And I think I love, Michael, that you talk about a change of heart, because the beautiful thing is that Jesus said, I'm not going to leave you as orphans, I'm not going to leave you alone, and I send the Holy Spirit, the Counselor, to be with you. And so the really beautiful thing about being changed by Jesus, it's a dramatic image, but being washed in the blood of Jesus is that our sin is taken away and that we're changed on the inside, and he gives us a new heart, and he gives us a new spirit. And, you know, the Holy Spirit changes our heart and helps us to see people like Jesus sees people. And so as you're talking about taking your boy down to the park to meet the people, that was a beautiful picture in my mind. I could just see it, like you going down to the park with your son, and it's honouring people and it's respecting them and loving them. And you know, the stories of Jesus, how, you know, in his day there were groups of people that were considered to be you don't hang out with those people, you don't be with them, but Jesus went to be with them. And I think as we talk together on that committee on reconciliation, we're talking about what does it look like to recognise the past and then have a change of heart and then be together. And I think I've been thinking a lot, brother, about recognising the past, and Michael, you've encouraged me to think about the area we live in. Like one of the things that's really been profound that you've shared with me that I've really taken to heart and tried to think through is to think about what has been the impact of colonisation on Aboriginal people in particular areas where our churches are. And if a local church is actually going to say, you know, there's a local church here in Dharawal country here in Sutherland Shire, and the Dharawal people were here, well, what's happened to the Dharawal people? What was their lived experience? Where are they now? And so at Michael's encouragement, I've talked to some of the aunties in the Sutherland Shire and asked them, what's happened to the Dharawal people in Sutherland Shire? And they've told me that exactly what you said about how people wanted to make money in this area and start farms, and the Aboriginal people were here. Originally, Sutherland Shire was on the outskirts of Sydney, and so a lot of people wanted to have farms, and so the Aboriginal people were here and they were moved, and so they moved them to the Blue Mountains. And she said that the Dharawal people from the Sutherland Shire used to live in Grace Point, where I live today, and down below my house, in the river down below my house, there would have been the sound of Aboriginal children playing in the water and swimming. And just below my house, at the street below my street, there's a scar tree, and it's a very visceral reminder of what you're talking about, because the council have been great. They've said don't knock that tree down, because when they wanted to build two houses, they had to build them further apart than normal so that the tree could still be there. But the scar tree's still there, and I show my sons that scar tree, and quite regularly we go and say that's a scar tree, and a scar tree is where the people who lived here built a canoe. And so they came up to the tree and they cut a canoe out of the bark of the tree, and they pulled the bark off, and that canoe would have been floated down in the river below my house. And it's quite painful to recognise that, and to think of the pain that would have been caused to those people to be moved out of Grace Point into the Blue Mountains, which is so far away from here. For people who aren't from Sydney, that's about, even now it's still an hour and a half drive away from here. So to be taken from your river and your place where your people had been for thousands of years, and then, you know, there's middens down on the river where people would sit and eat seafood and shellfish and leave the shells, and that's called a midden. And there's a fish trap in that river where the Aboriginal people made a line of rocks so that the fish could come in and spawn, and then they'd be able to farm the fish in that fish trap. And that's still there, but the people aren't. And so to recognise that, I suppose, Michael, my question is, like, as we recognise that as local churches, is there a place for us to be telling those stories in church, or do you think of other things that we could be doing with that regard to recognise some of the things that even go back that far? I mean, just quickly again, before you answer, one of my friends, I remember in the 1990s going around to one of my friends' houses, and his dad had a photo of an Aboriginal man in 1905 dressed in traditional Aboriginal clothes on a natural stone bridge that goes over a creek, and that natural stone bridge is literally 2 minutes away from here. You drive past it on a street called Northwest Arm Road to Grace Point, and I drive past that bridge every day, and it reminds me every day that that the Dharawal people aren't here anymore. We're on Dharawal land, because he was a traditional Dharawal man with a spear and dressed in Aboriginal clothes in 1905, standing on that stone bridge, and then he was moved because people wanted to make money out of the land that he was on. And I suppose telling that story is important in and of itself. But have you got any thoughts about how, as local churches, Christians could be doing more to recognise that? Maybe researching stories in their areas and telling those stories in churches, maybe?
The knowledge, or I guess respect of the past, it's crucial. You know where you come from before you can go forward.
Yeah,
in
that's
a sense.
good.
So with churches, especially when they first settled in this country, they got the best bits of land. Often the highest points of the hills and the valley. And I do think it's good for our churches to have a knowledge of the land they're sitting on. I think it's just out of respect, to check, to know where the pipes are. They always say ring before you dig.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
yeah.
they can still find out about Aboriginal people's past there, not just for pipes, but also for the heritage of the land. And that's just good sense. It's just to know, well, we're sitting on this land where the custodians once walked this land. Now we're custodians of this land. I don't know if they realise that the churches who now sit on the land that our people were custodians on, they become custodians. I don't know if they realise that. Not because they earn it, but because God appointed them to be custodians of that land, on top of where the Aboriginal people were too, So it's just a recognition to show respect, and then take seriously the custodianship that they now have. We talk about the spreading of the gospel as a key focus of the church, and that is. But in doing that, comes in the custodianship of how you treat the land, because the church must demonstrate good custodianship, because God said that from the beginning, that we were supposed to be good stewards of the land, caring for the livestock and the animals. It hasn't stopped that mandate of God. It's not like, let's forget that, let's just build buildings and highways. The responsibility is still there for man to be good stewardships of God's creation. It has never stopped. So one thing the church can do today is be good custodians of the land, not just of their little bit of, not of their little block, but of their community. Because when I look at custodianship, our people view it as a holistic custodianship of our community, of our children, of our women, of the drunks, of the hopeless and lonely, and the widows and the prisoners, that's all our community. And the church has a responsibility to be good stewards over them. Yes, over the land, over the people, and sadly churches have lost that idea. I think they've just focused on their church, on their little clique, and their world is that big, and they've forgotten about the community. They think, let the welfare look after them fellas. But we were the ones who looked after the welfare of the people. God gave us that mandate. We can't just leave it to Centrelink to deal with them, because they don't do a good job either. So people's hearts are hurting, and people are lost, and therefore the church says, well, we need to step in there and step up and start being good custodians of our community. I know it's a bit heavy duty, but that's how I see the scriptures. I
think it's good too, because then as we're respecting the past and understanding it, it's also the present too, isn't it? Because there is whole communities that were moved out of the Solomon Shire from the Dharawal people who were moved out of here, but there are still Dharawal people here too. And how can we be friends with each other and make links with each other and care together for this community? And I think that's a really beautiful vision of reconciliation being expressed as well. But can I ask you another question too? Like with regard to the stolen generation, I think some of our viewers and listeners might not realise that it's actually quite a recent thing. So some of the things that happened, we could look back to the early 1900s and say that was a long time ago, but massacres were still taking place in the mid to 1900s as well, and also the stolen generation kind of didn't finish until the early 1980s. So that's actually within our lifetime. Like I was born in 1968, so this is still something that impacts people in their lived experience today too. Could you share with us a bit more about what you think has been the impact of the stolen generation and any more detail about that?
Thousands of children taken from their homes, and I think it's fair to say that pretty much every Aboriginal community, every Aboriginal family has been impacted by the stolen generation in some way or another, either directly or indirectly. So what you're saying is the Aboriginal population of this country in some way or other has had a knife in them about the loss of their families, which is grief and loss, and it's transgenerational trauma. So then you wonder, well, how come Aboriginal people make up 40% of the prison population? We're only 3% of the population. You think, well, how does that work? Because our community is so broken, and it's not because of what we've done, it's just because of the fruits of our past. I don't blame it, it's just the way it is. The community is really hurting and hard to trust people and that. And so when I talk about churches having a acknowledgement of our people, it's just a healthy respect and appreciation and a concern to be praying for the Aboriginal people of their region, because it's very hard in our communities. And in their churches to have some way where when an Aboriginal person walks through their door, most people won't go to a church of our people because often it's negative. Often society has issues with our people, and we won't fit in churches because that's just the way they do things. We walk in there and it's sort of odd, and churches are funny churches, like they can be cliquey, they can be all different things, and for an Aboriginal person who already has issues of community issues and trying to connect with groups, a church is a scary thing. It's like a little club. They run their own things. They have their own raffles. I don't know what they do, but they run their own.
We could have a meat raffle.
They run their own stuff, and for an outsider to walk in, it's very daunting.
That's a good point.
Let alone for an Aboriginal person.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
They walk in there, see all these faces, look at them and go, whoa. And see what happens is we're trained in our churches to go and meet people and ask their questions. Well, that's quite intimidating for Aboriginal people. They go, whoa, is this fella that don't even know me? He doesn't know my dog's name. He's asking me all these personal things.
Yeah,
it's like, what's going on here? Well, it's a totally different cultural mindset.
Yeah.
Our culture is to sit and listen, to watch before we even move. We just sit down and go, because it's our way. We want to observe and see before we actually engage and meet. Where Western mindsets jump on you straight away and start going through your pockets and seeing what your job is and how much money you earn, and they just want to know everything about you. It's like, bro, you don't even know me. But that's their mindset. Where an Aboriginal person meets another Aboriginal person, we don't never ask them what their job is. We never ask them anything. We just say, bro, who's your people? Where's your people come from? What's your mob? That's what we ask them. Because then we have our traditional ties to our people around our tribal links, and that's our cultural protocol. And it's not threatening. It's not daunting. Yeah, bro, this is my people here. I'm a Dunghutti fellow from the North Coast, that's my tribe. And when other fellows are from around there, I have an instant connection with them. And from Larperoos right down to Eden, I've got blood ties right through there. So I can connect with all these different people through our tribal ties. And all of a sudden we have a connection. And I don't even talk about God, because I always believe you've got to know a person before you share the greatest person you know, and that's the Lord. They're not going to listen unless you know them and have a relationship, a partnership, a connection. And then you say, and they see it from your life, and then when you have a connection, then you can share. And that's the difference where Westerns, they want to get straight hitting the gospel, hit you up straight away before you even know your name, It's just, and that's cool. It's just different cultures. We want to know a person before you start sharing personal and deep things about
But can you help us understand the difference in cultural mindset and, for example, Westerners, how can we be better at that?
Well, I think Jesus set the pattern when he sits with the woman at the well and talks to her about her life.
Just chat.
And then he says, look, let me tell you about this living water. So he sat, he engaged, even though he shouldn't have, culturally, but he wanted to love her, and he said, look, and he knew all about her, but he sat in a yarn. And then he talks about the living water, where often I see in the Western culture, they don't want to talk about. Talking about lives are messy. And people go, I don't want to know about your life. I've got no time for your troubles. I've got my own troubles, you know. and Western people, I often see that they keep their shirts tight and their buttons tight, and they don't want to talk about nothing. But with Aboriginal people, we talk about life. We talk about our heartaches, our struggles. If fellas try to commit suicide, he'll tell you, bro, he's not going to hide nothing. That's the beauty of Aboriginal people. What you see is what you get. We're not trying to portray ourselves in any way. If you're not all right with the Lord, a brother he won't pick up a guitar. Bro, you playing? No, I'm not all right with the Lord today, bro. Sweet. Why? Because I know when you walk with the Lord, you got to be real, and you got to be serious and faithful to God. And when you stumble and you fall a bit and your eyes are off the Lord a bit, you know it. No one's going to tell you that. No, just got to get sorted, bro. All right, no worries. So we're in the Western Church. You know what people do after time behind their doors. You know,
also the church miracle you've talked about, Stu, how like everyone can be fighting in the car and then you just turn up and like everyone's happy and smiling.
So it's just a different world, different cultural expression. If you're fighting with your missus, you'll still fight with her at church. you know, you're not going to, wait till we get home and we'll fight again, you know, or if you're going to yell at kids, you'll yell at them, you know. We're not going to hide it and go, wait till I get home. You say, because wait till you get home, I'm going to flog you, and you go, no, you'll hit them right there and then. If they're mucking up, get here. And that's why you see people fighting on the street, sometimes blackfellas, they're not going to be hiding in the bushes. They'll just hit each other right there and then. You go to certain parks, all over Australia, you'll find blackfellas fighting in parks because they're just struggling with life's issues, and they turn to the whatever, drugs and alcohol, and they'll do it in the park, they'll do it on the streets, where often Western people will go and hide and close the door before they fight, you know?
Or before they start drinking. They just go home, they get their bottle-o and take their stuff home, and then they drink at home. And you're saying, like, maybe Westerners hide behind, you know, those sorts of things rather than doing stuff out. And
all I'm saying, we're a very expressive culture, and that's why suicide is a high rate in our community, and we have the highest rate in the world of suicide in our youth.
Wow.
It's just ridiculous. And the difference is our young people, with all the issues they have to try to deal with in their lives, and social issues and personal issues, the thing I've seen is our young ones will just go and do it. Where often in a Western context, they'll spend time planning it. Not always. We're a responsive a culture. We're a reactionary culture. We just do it. Not saying it's right or wrong. All I'm saying is that's how a lot of our young people do it, and that's why we have a high rate of suicide in our community, in our youth.
So if they think it, they
higher
just
than
go
any other culture in the world, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just sad that our young people feel so broken and at that time, at that instance. I've seen young fellas with the world at their feet still kill themselves because at that right instance, he's just hit the bottom and bang. And I've done too many funerals for young people who I thought had so much potential, and they had things coming in their lives, amazing leaders, role models, but they hit the bottom and bang. And it's just an issue we're trying to deal with all over Australia. Suicide is just an issue in our communities, remote communities, urban communities. There's a lot of young ones are struggling with their identity and their value.
What are your thoughts on that in terms of, like, another thing, we talking about progress again, right? What are your thoughts on in terms of that? Like, how are we able to help those people that are really struggling with such things like suicide?
Yeah, it's, well, you know, you look in the farmers and there's a high rate of suicide in the farmers. It's just the brokenness of society and the brokenness of people, and they get to a point where there's no other solution, and it saddens me because I see too many young ones, and they're our future. That's the sad bit, you know, like, and they're all precious, they're all beautiful, every one of them, and it's just that our communities are struggling to embrace them and have a safety net for them. So with our cultural breakdown and our community breakdown and family breakdowns, before there was a net for our kids back in the day, our communities were knit and tight, and someone was struggling, there was always someone there. But we don't have that these days. Our communities are that broken and fragmented. We struggle to keep anything straight. And so our kids slip through the cracks all the time because there isn't a safety net, and the government's trying to address it, but it will never come from a government because they can't. Programs can't solve a broken heart, and they can't solve a feeling of low self-esteem, low socio-economical issues, broken families, stolen generation. You can't solve that with money. You can't solve it with a program. It's just got to be, our community has to be rebuilt up again to have our networks catching these young ones, which we don't have because of all the past. I'm not blaming them. All I'm saying is we've lost the network we used to have to save our kids and keep them safe, and protected. And even same with funerals, everything. Our sorry business, all those things have all been affected by colonisation. I'm not blaming them. All I'm saying is we've never had anything to replace it with. So a man's role was always clear. We don't have a man's role now because it's been broken down. So what is Aboriginal man? We're still trying to clarify that for our young fellas to know. What is a man? A lot of lads think going to prison makes you a man, And it's a sad when the young fellas think, I've done my time, I've done this and that. Then they're little men. That's not our culture. But that's what it's filling a hole, a gap. That they just think, I just need to be a man and do a bit of time. And so we're way beyond the 8 ball. And for that's where church comes in, because the church really set a pattern for our communities back in the day, especially in Australia, not for our people, and I believe the church can rebuild our safety nets in our community. That's what I dream about, that our kids can know there is a place to go to get a feed, a place to go when there's violence around. So our missions, our Aboriginal missions, nearly every mission you go to, I would swear that there's an old auntie on that mission who always feeds the kids. So when everyone's drinking and carrying on in different places, there's always a house, a safe house, and the kids will go there for a feed, and they know they can sleep there for the night. And when the wind settles the next day, they'll come back home. And it's a beautiful thing. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. Our women, our aunties, they're the ones who saved our people. They're the ones who stepped up when all the violence and all the stuff's been going on silly. And they're the ones who kept our kids safe. Yes, we have a high rate of abuse in our kids, and 1 in 3 girls are assaulted. We have a high rate of abuse amongst our girls and boys. Brokenness, sin. But I'm hoping, sounds like it's impossible to change, but I believe that God in His wisdom and His strength and power, He can rebuild our little Aboriginal churches. They're only few and far between. You go from here, Sydney, there's only like 2 or 3 Aboriginal churches between here and Eden. And we've got the biggest mob around there. We've got 50,000 Aboriginal people here in Sydney. There's not many Aboriginal churches. And I'm the only one Aboriginal person employed in the Sydney Diocese as a pastor amongst 50,000 people. And I can't do that. I can't solve that.
Yeah.
But I'll do what I can in my little patch. What I'm saying is, though it might seem impossible, all things are possible with God, and I see that He will sustain His people. Uncle Ike in them, he's a hard servant. He just faithfully serves. On paper, it might look really flash and really great, but I guarantee you that people will be knocking his door when they need him. The kids will know where they can go to get some food or when they need safety. My job isn't, from 8 to 5. I get doors, knocks on the door, and that you just respond to whatever's happening in your community, because that's what you're there for. You're a servant, and you're open 24/7 like 7-Eleven, and you just respond to whatever you can do, on the time, at the moment, and if you can help one person through that day, as far as I'm concerned, you're done well. I've been told, from the diocese that our ministry's not that great. It's not doing really well, in regards to numbers and that. We don't care about numbers. We don't care about the income that we raise, which is nothing. It doesn't faze us. All we want to do is make sure that the one person God brings across our path, that we'll minister to them at that time, in whatever shape or form that is. And as far as I'm concerned, that's success. That's my approach to ministry.
Yeah, I feel like there's, you've talked a lot about the pain and the anguish and everything that your people have experienced, but then there's also a real positive side to what
Yes.
you're talking about, what Jesus has done for us, and I find that super encouraging. Stu, I'm just wondering if you've got anything to add what Michael's saying.
Yeah, I think that if Jesus meets us all personally himself, like, then we should be doing that with other people, shouldn't we? And I think that sometimes Westerners can get caught up in programs and look at statistics and KPIs and, you know, how much money's coming in and how much, you know, does this cost and what
Return on investment.
all those sorts of things. Yeah. And I think getting to the point of coming back to just meeting people where they're at and loving them where they are, and it's amazing how so much more falls into place when you put the kingdom of heaven first, and then you put other people in their right places, made in the image of God and precious. And I think local church also excites me. That when I listen to you talk about local church, Michael, that's like, you know, with all the government programs and even church programs that are around, there's all that stuff around, but there's something all of us can do in the local church. We can all love that person. We can all, you know, listen that it's maybe not the best thing to rush up to someone and ask them lots of questions. You know, maybe just be okay with quiet silence and listen and put that other person first and embrace someone who's different rather than always looking for people who are the same. I think you're right. I think our churches have become quite cliquey, and we can sometimes focus in on what are the issues that are facing the people within the local church rather than looking outside of the local church and thinking about the community in general. And being outward looking like that is a really, really beautiful thing, like going for a walk in the park outside the church and seeing who's there and just sit down on the bench and talk to them. I mean, my wife and I went out to have lunch the other day down at Thirroul, Ostermere actually, and we just went into a place down at Ostermere, and this older couple came in, and they were in the 80s, and you know, the lady was in a wheelchair, and the gentleman, you know, had reserved a table by the window, which was in front of where we were sitting. And he didn't just go and sit down and think of himself. He turned around and he said, "Oh, I just want to say sorry that we've blocked your view. Now you can't see the view." And I said, "Oh, that's fine. You know, that's your table." But I said to my wife, I wonder if that gentleman's a Christian, because he wasn't just thinking of himself coming and sitting and eating his meal. He looked over and went, "Oh, there's another couple there that maybe can't see past the view now." And anyway, I just watched them as they were interacting. It was really beautiful because his wife had a bit of Alzheimer's, and maybe she was forgetting a few things, and he was just beautiful, loving her. And he said, "Oh, thank you for not being worried about us sitting here, because it's our 64th wedding anniversary." And, you know, at one level I could have thought, just a couple of people just went and sat down and had lunch. But he noticed us, and because he noticed us, I found myself noticing him. And he said, you know, it's our 64th wedding anniversary. And so we went and talked to them and had a really lovely time of fellowship, and turned out they were Christians, and that they were that older gentleman, they were been married for 64 years, and he told us their story, and he told us about how they met when she was 16 and he was 18, and he was a seafarer, and he was coming and going, and when he met her on the day he met her, he asked her to marry him. He said, "I don't think I'm going to find a more beautiful woman." And she said yes, but then they weren't allowed to marry because she was 16, and he had to wait 2 years. So he was coming and going from the port, being on his ships that he was a merchant, and he came back. And anyway, he's telling us all this story, and it was such a rich experience to listen to his story. And if he hadn't turned around and said, "Hey, are you okay that we're sitting here?" we wouldn't have had that interaction. It would have just been people come and go. But to slow things down and to listen. And anyway, he ended up blessing us, because it turns out they were Christians, and he was actually a chaplain to the seafarers. And he said to us that he met Jesus when he was 40 years old, and then he decided to stop going to sea, and he started ministering to the people who went to sea. And he said that the people who were on the boats were very lonely and often not seen by society because they lived on the ocean, not on the land. And so people who live on the ocean don't really factor in on people's awareness. And so he said, I knew their life, and I wanted to make sure that we recognised them. And they used to call me their angel. And even though many of them came from different parts of the world, I would just minister to them. And anyway, all this happened because this gentleman just stopped and said, you know, I hope we're not getting in the way of your view. And when you were talking about taking your son down to the park, I'm like, that's really basic Christianity, isn't it? To recognise another human being like he recognised us and said, look, I can see that you're not seeing the view. I want to recognise that it's your loss for our gain. And I just want to say thank you for appreciating that. So Lou and I ordered them a drink and just to bless them. And he was so touched. He said, thank you for sharing in our celebration because my daughter would usually come and be with us on our wedding anniversary, but she's not able to be here today because she's working. And he said that it was nice that God brought some of our family to be here to be a part of the day with us because we're Christian brothers and sisters, and it's real. We are really a family, and so the things we're talking about today are really powerful and I think can make a big difference in people's lives. So I love listening to your perspective, Michael, and I think that there are negative things that we need to keep talking about from Westerners too, because just as we've talked about some of the challenges that Aboriginal communities face too, there's a lot of challenges that Western communities face as well. And I think we can humbly walk together and share our problems with each other instead of just sharing, pleasant, chit chat. I think getting to know each other. And I think the other thing that you've taught me is that it's about doing it long term too, not just for a little while. Like it's not like a program that lasts a year in someone's life. It's like abiding presence where we spend time to get to know each other. And
not church for an hour either.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that long term, low key relational ministry that we've learned a lot from Aboriginal Christian communities. To encourage you, we've noticed that you've slowed down and made people important, and we've tried to slow down in our Western church here in Sydney and have a meal together each week and do things like that. That it means that there's some other things that we probably miss out on doing because we're spending a bit more time that particular day at church. But what we gain from a story or hearing someone's testimony was the funny thing about this gentleman that I was talking about. He said Merle's mum and dad didn't like him because they were scared of this, seafarer, and also interestingly, he said, I had a really hard start because he said I actually had an Aboriginal grandfather, and of all the children, I was more Aboriginal than all the other children in my family. And back when I was growing up, this probably would have been the 40s and 50s. He said my mum and dad were embarrassed about me, so they were very cruel to me, but they were very lovely to their kids who were whiter. They were more lovely, but they were racist to their own son because they were embarrassed of him because he was darker. And so he said, as a young boy, I ran away from home, and I went to a boys' home. And then when I was in the boys' home, that was better than my own family. They were nicer to me there, even though that was a very harsh place. And he said I had to get out of there too because they were so cruel, and that's why I went to sea. And he said when I met Merle, her parents were racist towards me because I had darker skin than they did. And they said, you can't get married until she's 18. So we waited, and they waited 2 years, and then she was 18, and he said, we got married when they couldn't stop us. And he said, but they said it'd never last. And he said, I threw up a little prayer today to ask the Lord to go and, if they're in heaven, to go and tell them we're still married 64 years later. And I said to Lou, and I was just so warmed by the story, and I thought, that's interesting. That was just Monday we heard that story, and today we're here talking about it. But I'm not embarrassed to say that as I was watching him buy a cake and a cappuccino for his wife, and they were just having this bounty of great lunch celebrating their anniversary, I just started crying, and I said, well, I don't know why I'm crying. And then she started crying, and Lou and I are sitting at another table away from them, so they didn't see us, but we're just bawling our eyes out and crying because it was so lovely. And then I said to him, I said, I thank you for blessing us. And he said, you know what I've learned in all my years of being a seafarer chaplain? He said, it's not about your title, it's not about how big your ministry is. It's about loving each person that comes into your life and treating them as a human being and loving them. And he said, I know you, because I told him I was an Anglican minister too. And he said, I know you're an Anglican minister, but I want to remind you, don't forget to love people. Don't just run a program in your church. And that was interesting when you're saying the same thing today. And you got to love people. And I was thinking how that was just a serendipitous, surprising thing that happened, but I think God was intending for me and my wife Lou to meet that couple on Monday because they taught us about being a married couple. And I was watching him love and serve his wife, and he said to me, I've been a carer for my wife for 20 years because she's not been very well for 20 years. He said, but she's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And he said, I know you won't believe it, but when she was younger, she was even more beautiful than she is now. And I was just like, there's the love of Jesus just coming out of this man. And it was just this chance, what seemed to be a chance, him just turning around saying, sorry, I'm sitting in front of you. And I thought that's a kind thing for someone to say. So being kind, and loving and then stopping. And we spent probably an hour with them that we didn't even expect to, and it was such a short amount of time really, but it's really impacted me, and I don't think I'll ever forget that day. And isn't that kind of what we want to do? Hey, like just help people to remember that we loved them. And he ended up serving us even though we shouted them a drink, and that was a really nice day. So I don't know if that's relevant really to what we're talking about, but I think to me it's been helpful again to have that reinforced in me from what you said, Michael, about people are really important to Jesus. And the racism he suffered from his own parents, and because he had a bit, I think, and I said, how do you feel about that now? He said, I'm really proud to be an Aboriginal man. And I said, that's beautiful. Isn't that wonderful? And he said, yeah, I am. And Merle helped me to be proud to be who I am. And she loved me for who I am, and she was really proud of me that I was an Aboriginal man. And I think if we have a good look at ourselves today, there is still racism in the church, and I think that we need to talk about it. And we talked about it on the podcast last week that this artist Kendrick Lamar in America was talking about the Black Lives Matter and all the things they're trying to do. But I'm really excited to hear the thoughts that you have today, because the answers in Jesus are really tactile and tangible and real. So thanks, Michael. That was really helpful.
Yeah, that's cool. I was going to ask you one more question, Michael, before we finish. We talked about so many different issues. As Stu's named some of them. We talked about reconciliation, Black Lives Matter, cultural mindset, being custodians of the land, regardless of who we are. There's the deaths in custody is another thing. But then Stu reminded me that something that you said is that we need to walk side by side. I would just love you to probably wrap it up for us by saying, or giving us your thoughts about what do Australians in the church need to be thinking about now during this time, and how can we walk side by side?
It's a big question, but
yeah, sorry.
no, that's all right. I think the key, and I'm no expert on this, I'm just trying to find my way too, but I think the key is education has its place, don't get me wrong, but it's what we do with education. So it's having we have knowledge, but without love, it's nothing. So I think the key for churches is they don't have to do acknowledgement of country at the church. They don't have to have a plaque. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to have an Aboriginal flag at the church. If they choose to, great. I'm happy for that, because it's a signpost for Aboriginal people. So these fellows must have some recognition of Aboriginal people because they've got a flag there or they've got whatever, and that warms a person's heart to think that there's something there. Because when Aboriginal people see something of our heritage, it warms you a little bit to the place. And so it's just a symbol, and that's good. But I think the key is just the heart of a person and their mindset, because some people will never ever give a hoot about Aboriginal people. They think, look, it's in the past, let's just get over it and move on, and that's fair enough. And if people are like, that's all right, no dramas. The same as I said to them that the Anzacs, that was history, let's just forget it and move on. I guarantee you that I'd get a lot of backlash, because how dare you talk about the Anzacs like that, And I would never say about the Anzacs, because we've got a lot of people who were Anzacs. Yeah. But what I do say is that it's where you're at in your own heart and your own mind in regards to black people. Let me clarify. When I talk about black people, I'm talking about Aboriginal people in this context, because we've got a lot of different coloured groups here in this country, all different colours, shapes and sizes, and that's beautiful. But when you regards to Aboriginal people, we're not a multicultural group, because we come from this land. Everybody else on the land is multicultural. So all these Englishmen and all those fellows who've been whoever, they're all multicultural to us because they come to our land. I don't know if you've thought about that. So these are all foreigners. It's bizarre, but it's just having a respect in your heart and mind. Not to have to give nothing to Aboriginal people. It's just having a healthy recognition. Look, you know what? They're the most disadvantaged group in this whole country. They've been through hell and back. And the strength of our people is amazing. The resilience of Aboriginal people, anywhere you get in this country, our people are resilient and they're tough and they're hard. And that's why when you bring the gospel to them, they're hardened people, because they've had to be hard to survive. Not because they want it, it's just It's the nature of this country. It's a hard country. It's hard ground, and a gum will only grow strong in hard ground, and it'll be harder than the gums here because there's less water in the bush, so they're gonna be hard, and that's why the hardwood grows out in the bush there because it's less water, and sometimes the hardwood's the best wood when it comes to ceremonies and that, and our gums here are softer timber because there's more water available. So it's just a matter of acknowledging, recognising it, but also just having a respectful attitude, and also having it an open discussion. Like I said, it's about how you talk about them in your family, and when you see, all these different pictures of Aboriginal people, often negative, it's just trying to educate our children, and educate our children the same about what they see. When they see a police car, most Aboriginal people will drive the other way, because I tell my daughter, when she got a licence, don't ever pull over for a police car when they pull the lights on you. Wait till you get to a public area. Why is that? Because the police, I'm not saying negative stuff, the reality is, for Aboriginal people, the police have real issues with a lot of our people, and there's some great coppers out there, don't get me wrong, but often the experience is Aboriginal people will get pulled over more often than everybody else. There's a lot more negative things done to our kids, our teenagers. So I tell my daughter, when a cop puts his lights on, you drive to the nearest place where it's public, especially at night time. Never pull over in the dark with a copper. Drive where there's lights and there's someone lit up. That's ridiculous. I'll tell my son when he's got the same thing, never pull over with a copper. Drive somewhere public so they can't hurt you and do you wrong. It's ridiculous you have to do that where the coppers are there. So what I'm saying is, that's just awareness and a respect, and how you talk about in your own backyard about our people will change how the next generation views our people, if that makes sense. So, and that's the church in general, that's the community in general. Everything's all public discussion and comments, and when I see the hundreds of Aboriginal people dying in custody with nobody held accountable, it hurts. Some of my own family have been murdered in prisons and detention centres. No one gives a hoot. No one's held accountable. So no one of them Aboriginal people get a bit hurt and angry, and when the copper comes, they're angry at them, and they come to do often negative things, And we try to teach the young coppers, there's a respectful way to approach our people. I've seen it too many times. I've had them pull up in the paddy wagon. I've experienced the love of the police have. What I'm saying is, our churches can be a key role in that. In praying for change, praying for justice, that every people can get justice in this country, that our children will be cared about. We've got children who are killed, and there's nothing. There's no publicity. There's no anything in our little towns. Black kid could be killed, no worries. But if you've got blonde hair and that, you go on the front page, and that's the reality for our kids. Our kids never get publicity. Our kids very rarely get justice. That's just our life. Shouldn't be that way. So I'm just trying to say that, justice will come when the Lord returns. That's the only true justice. Well, we trust that God will bring justice in His time, where our kids can be safe, and our kids can have justice, and our institutions and our prisons and all that sort of stuff. But it starts off with a prayer. Our old people have been praying for years, our old aunties. And if I can say one thing for our churches, be prayerful. Cost them nothing. Just have a prayer that this country may be treat our people properly. Not because they have to, not because they're forced to, and nor should a church be forced to do anything. But to pray is a beautiful thing, and to when you meet an Aboriginal person, like you said, brother, just love them.
Because Jesus changes our hearts, right?
That's right. I don't care who you run into. You just treat them as your neighbour sort of thing, and just quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, It's not rocket science. It's just to say, look, right this minute, I'm going to pause and just listen to somebody else's story and see how God wants me to bless them.
I mean, I'm always reminded something that Stu said a lot earlier in a Shockazorba episode or a Shockazorba season was, we're not just reconciled to God through Jesus, we're reconciled to each other.
Yes.
And that's what I really hear when you're saying.
Something that's interesting about that, Michael, about the issue with police. I definitely take on what you say, that there's some good cops out there and doing their jobs and that. But one day I was experienced a similar thing that you're talking about, that I was camping with some Aboriginal friends on the Barwon River out in Brewarrina, and we were camping with our Aboriginal friends, me and Braddo. So Braddo and his family, and me and my family, and some of our Aboriginal friends there. And in the middle of the night, a police car came along the other side of the Barwon River and put out their searchlight on our tents. And it sounded like the person in the car had been drinking, and yelled out on the microphone of the car, "Get out of your tents," and said a racist word. Get out of your tents. And so Braddo and I got out of our tents, and we just went, "What are you doing?" When the searchlight went over us, and the person in the car could see we were white people, and then drove off, sped off. And I said to my Aboriginal brother, "Oh, you didn't get out of the tent?" He goes, "Yeah, I didn't want to get shot, eh?" And I'm like, I just experienced that, and I said to my Aboriginal brothers the next day, like, "Oh, maybe we should go down to the police station and report that, and find out what's going on with that." And they said, "Oh, you might just want to leave that with us, brother." Like, and it was just really visceral and really scary and really sad. And like you said, there are cops that are doing a great job, but that was something that I experienced as I was sharing that camping trip, and that was only in the early 2000s that I experienced that. And I think that there's a lot of like you said, if churches are just little cliques of people who are just caring about what's happening in their church, they're not thinking about some other people and other issues. I mean, we've talked about an issue in previous podcasts called the homogeneous unit principle, which says that let's get groups that are all like each other to meet together in churches together. You get a whole heap of city churches, and they all just hang out together in city churches, and they don't get to be friends with Aboriginal churches. And I'm thinking what's really cool about our friendship is we're not only friends, but we're bringing our churches together too, so that our churches can be friends. And if a local church can make a difference, then 2 local churches can make a bit more of a difference, and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. So I really love your vision for that relational reality to grow, and for our churches to become more and more safe places, and to talk about the problems we have in our church, and talk about racism in our church, and talk about those issues that we need to get a good heart and actually think about changing our heart towards other people. And that's a really Christian way of thinking about the issue, because it starts with us and how do we make a difference, but not just care about ourselves, but care about other people. And so it's really meant a lot to me today to hear your thoughts on that. So thank you, brother. It's really powerful.
Just on our little journey, we've got like storylines, song lines, and if we can be a part of someone else's song line in their life, then that's cool, even for a little bit, or wherever long the journey may be. It's just investing your heart into somebody else's heart for that time, for whatever the journey takes, But and that's in a nutshell.
Yeah,
being willing.
I think I just really appreciate you being on, man. Thank you so much. I
appreciate the opportunity.
It's just I really appreciate your wisdom and faith, and you've been really encouraging. So thank you very much.
No worries.
We like to finish up the Shockazorba with a one-way. Do you know what a one-way is? Have you ever done that before?
Nah, we've just adapted something from the 70s. In the 70s, young people used to live in a culture where everyone were hippies, and so all the hippies used to go peace out all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And the young Christians thought they'd adapt that a bit to just be a one-way instead of peace. And they used to flash it. The American teenagers used to do this, and they used to, instead of flashing a peace sign, which all the kids used to do all the time, they used to go one way, meaning Jesus is the only way. And it reminded them that there is only one way. And as Jesus says in John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one goes to the Father except by me. So if you're happy to jump in with that one, what we finish the podcast with is, instead of flashing a peace sign, we flash a one way.
We just say one way.
Sorry, man. To that. I agree
so
with
if you want to jump in with that,
with us first,
I appreciate it. I like it.
Anyway, thanks everyone for listening. And again, Michael, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Stu, as well. And we'll finish
Thanks, Joel.
One way.
way.